Blake Donovan was not the kind of man who came home with flowers. In 22 years building the most powerful empire in New York's underworld, he had given orders that changed cities, closed deals that brought down entire families, and looked into the eyes of men begging for mercy without blinking once. Flowers were not part of the vocabulary of a man like that. But on that Thursday afternoon, leaving early from a meeting at the Newark port, Blake stopped at a flower shop on Fifth Avenue and stood on the sidewalk for 5 full minutes, staring at a bouquet of white roses before walking in and buying them without a word. The florist recognized the tattooed face and wrapped them in complete silence. In his other hand, a matte black Tiffany box, a diamond necklace that had cost more than most apartments in Queens. A gift 3 days before the wedding. Because Nicole had said last week that she had never received real flowers from a real man, and Blake had stored that sentence like a mission to be completed. The black Bentley stopped at the Upper East Side mansion at 4:30. Blake stepped out without waiting for Tommy, the bouquet in his left hand, the small box in his jacket pocket. The sky over New York was heavy, that lead gray shade the city takes in November when the wind comes off the river. He entered through the side door, the access he used when he wanted to arrive unannounced. An old habit. Survival. In his life, surprises were almost always bullets. The hall was quiet. No sound from the kitchen. The mansion held that silence of an empty place, but the second-floor lights were on. Blake climbed the marble staircase without making a sound. It was on the second landing that he heard Nicole's voice. Not the voice he knew. Not the smooth, calculated tone she used with him. This was a different voice. Thin as wire, sharp. The voice of someone who does not care about being overheard. You are completely useless. You cannot even manage to stay quiet. Blake stopped in the hallway. The guest room door was slightly open, yellow light spilling a narrow stripe across the dark carpet. Look at you. What a disgrace to bring something like you into my home. He moved closer without breathing, and through the gap in the door he saw. Emma was 6 years old, brown hair cut straight at jaw level, eyes too large for such a small face. She was crouched in the corner between the dresser and the wall, knees pulled tight to her chest, arms wrapped around her own legs as if she were trying to take up the smallest space possible. In front of her, Nicole stood with her arms crossed. Beige linen dress, blonde hair in a perfect bun. It was not anger on her face. Blake knew anger. This was contempt. The cold, quiet kind that belongs to someone who looks at another person and genuinely does not see a human being on the other side. You will stay in that corner until I decide you can leave. And if you cry, I promise you we'll have a real reason to cry. The girl did not cry. She only looked up at Nicole with those large dark eyes and stayed completely still. And it was that stillness, the quiet of a child who has already learned that making noise only makes things worse, that went through Blake in a way no bullet ever had. The bouquet of white roses slipped from his fingers. It fell onto the hallway carpet without a sound, the white petals spreading slightly on impact. Blake stood motionless. In 22 years, he had made decisions in seconds that changed destinies. But in that hallway, staring through the gap of a door at a 6-year-old girl folded into a corner, he could not move. Then Emma turned her head. Her eyes found his through the crack in the door. For a second that lasted far too long, they looked at each other. The child and the boss. Something passed through that look Blake could not name, but that stayed inside him like a mark burned into skin, as if those dark, quiet eyes were recognizing someone the little girl had been waiting a long time to see walk through a door. Nicole followed Emma's gaze and turned. When she saw Blake in the hallway, the transformation was instant. The mask returned so fast that anyone who had not seen her face 2 seconds earlier would have sworn it had never slipped. Blake, you are home early. Honey again. Soft, surprised, calculated. She stepped toward the door with the smile he had considered beautiful for 2 years. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Emma, still in the corner, head bowed back over her knees. The Tiffany box was in his pocket. He did not reach for it. He only looked at Nicole with the ice-blue eyes that 200 men in the underworld knew as the last signal before everything came apart, and spoke in a voice so flat and low it needed no volume to be the most frightening thing in the room. "Get out of this room." Nicole opened her mouth, closed it, and left. Blake pushed the guest room door open slowly, the way you open a door when you already know what is on the other side is fragile. Emma had not moved from the corner. She was still in the same position, knees to chest, arms wrapped around her legs, but her eyes tracked him the instant the door swung wider. Watchful eyes, the kind children develop when they spend too much time reading adult moods before the adult even opens their mouth. Blake did not crouch down immediately. He had learned long ago that moving fast towards something small and frightened is always the wrong instinct. He walked to the center of the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and said nothing. The silence stretched between them for a full minute. Emma watched him with those oversized dark eyes, assessing, deciding something. She was wearing a pale blue sweater 2 sizes too large, jeans with a small tear at the left knee, sneakers that had once been white. Nothing about her clothing said the word mansion. Everything about the way she sat in that corner said the word alone. "My name is Blake," he said. His voice came out softer than he intended, softer than he thought he was still capable of. The girl blinked. She already knew that. He looked around the room. No drawings on the wall. No small pile of books on the nightstand. No stuffed animal anywhere. Just a narrow bed with a plain white cover, a dresser, and a window with the curtains half drawn. "How long have you been here, Emma?" he said. Not a question. She hesitated, then held up 3 fingers. 3 months, he said. She nodded. Nicole had told him Emma was a temporary arrangement, a favor for a social worker she knew, a child between placements who needed somewhere for a few weeks. Blake had not asked many questions. He was never home enough to ask questions. "Did anyone show you your room when you arrived?" Emma looked at him steadily, then looked at the floor. Blake followed her gaze to the thin carpet, then the narrow bed. "This is your room," he said. She gave a very small nod. He stood, walked to the window, opened the curtains all the way. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Emma considered the question the way someone considers an offer that has conditions attached to it. Then she nodded once. He went downstairs. Nicole was on the white sofa, phone in hand, posture of someone who had rehearsed their next line 6 times. Blake walked past her without stopping and went to the kitchen. Franny, the housekeeper, looked up when he entered, and something crossed her face that she quickly rearranged into neutral, the expression of someone who knows something and has decided it is not their place to say it. "Has Emma been eating with the house staff?" he asked. Franny's hands stopped on the counter. "Mr. Donovan," she started. He looked at her, the kind of look that did not ask twice. "Miss Nicole prefers the child to eat in her room," Franny said carefully. Blake made a plate himself. Cold chicken, bread, apple slices, a glass of milk. He carried it upstairs. Emma had moved slightly away from the corner, 3 inches, a small renegotiation of territory. He set the plate on the floor in front of her and sat down on the carpet with his back against the dresser, at her level. Emma looked at the plate, looked at him, then picked up an apple slice and ate it slowly, watching him the entire time with eyes that missed nothing. He did not ask her to move to the table. He just sat there on the floor in his $3,000 suit, while a 6-year-old decided whether or not he was safe. She finished half the plate before she spoke for the first time. "Are you going to make her go away?" Emma asked. Her voice was smaller than he expected. Careful. The voice of a child who has learned to ask only the questions that matter most. Blake looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. Emma looked at the plate, picked up another apple slice, then said, without looking up, "Okay." Nicole was still on the white sofa when Blake came back downstairs. She had set her phone face down beside her, both hands folded in her lap. She was already crying. Not sobbing, not shaking, just two precise tears catching the lamplight as they moved down her cheekbones. The same tears, Blake now realized, had always arrived on schedule. I know what that looked like. Let me explain. Blake sat in the armchair across from her. He sat the way he sat at the head of a table when a deal was already decided and the meeting was only paperwork. Talk, he said. Nicole took a breath. Emma is a difficult child. The system sent her here because 3 other homes sent her back. She has behavioral problems, attachment issues. She lies, she provokes. What you saw tonight was the end of a very long day where she deliberately destroyed the arrangement I had spent 2 hours setting up for our rehearsal dinner tomorrow. I am not a monster, Blake. I am a woman who is 3 days from her wedding, managing an entire event, and dealing with a child the state placed in my home without asking me whether I was ready. I snapped. I should not have. But one moment does not define who I am. Blake looked at her. He had been in the business of reading people for 22 years, reading the difference between fear and performance, between truth and the kind of lie that wears truth as a coat. Nicole had always been good. She was perhaps the most skilled person he had ever watched do this. But tonight something had changed in the instrument he used to listen. Tonight he had sat on the floor of an empty room and watched a 6-year-old girl eat apple slices with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to expect the plate to be refilled. How long has she been eating alone in her room? Blake said. Nicole blinked. That was not the question she had prepared for. She eats with Franny when I'm busy, she said. Franny said differently, Blake answered. Nicole's jaw tightened by a fraction, a small mechanical failure in the performance. She recovered immediately. Franny misunderstood the arrangement. Blake stood. I am calling David Rains tonight, he said. Nicole looked up. David Rains was Blake's attorney. The name in their world meant that what followed would be documented, formal, and not subject to renegotiation. Blake. Her voice shifted. The honey gone. Something harder underneath. Think about what you are doing. We are 3 days from the wedding. The invitations went to 300 people. Your partners, your associates, everyone who matters in this city will be in that room Saturday. You want to blow that up over a child you have never even spoken to before tonight. Blake looked at her for the last time, the way a man looks at something he once valued. He looked for the thing he had believed was there for 2 years, and understood, with the particular coldness of absolute certainty, that it had never existed. I am not blowing anything up, he said. I am simply being clear about what happens next. He picked up his phone and walked toward the stairs. Nicole stood. Her voice dropped its last register of softness and landed somewhere flat and dangerous. You should think very carefully, Blake. My father knows people in this city that even you cannot afford to cross. Blake stopped on the first step. He did not turn around. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in the same quiet tone he had used his entire adult life when the conversation was already finished. Tell your father, he said, that the last man who used that kind of language with me is still explaining himself. Then he went upstairs, and the only sound in the house was his footsteps on the marble, even and unhurried, disappearing down the hallway toward Emma's room. Nicole was gone before sunrise. Blake heard the car at 4 in the morning. Luggage wheels on marble, and a door pulled shut, with the careful control of someone managing their exit. He did not go downstairs. He lay in the dark with his eyes open and listened to the gate close, and when the sound of the engine disappeared into the November night, he felt nothing dramatic. Just the quiet settling of a house that had been holding its breath. At 7, he called David Rains. 12 sentences. Rains asked no unnecessary questions. By 9, a formal separation letter had been sent to Nicole's father's attorney. By 10, the wedding venue had been notified. By 11, Brody was in the kitchen doorway with the expression he wore when he had already absorbed bad news and was deciding how much to say. "She went to her father's place in Connecticut," Brody said. "Richard Cole was there when she arrived." Blake looked up from his coffee. Cole was Nicole's father's oldest associate. 30 years on the edge of legitimate business and the kind of arrangements that required careful paperwork. Cole being present at 6 in the morning meant the conversation had been scheduled before Nicole left the house. "She made a call from the house line at 3:42, Brody added. "Before she packed," Blake said. Brody nodded. "Whatever she is building, let her build it. I want to know the shape of it before she shows it to me." Brody left. Blake went upstairs. Emma was sitting on the bed fully dressed, sneakers on, hands in her lap. She looked at him with the expression he was beginning to recognize as her default, watchful and still. "Are you all right?" he asked. She considered it seriously, then gave a small nod that was not entirely convincing. He looked around the room. A single drawing taped inside the closet door. A house in pencil with a garden, flowers that might have been roses, 2 figures, one small, one tall with yellow hair. Blake looked at it without speaking. "Have you ever been to Central Park?" he asked. She shook her head. "Get your coat," he said. She pulled out a coat thin for November, a gray zip-up bought 2 sizes ahead to save money. He said nothing about it. He held the door open, and she passed under his arm into the hallway. "Clear out the guest room today." "Oh," he told Franny at the bottom of the stairs. "Everything that was there before August. Then find out what color she likes." Outside, Emma stopped on the top step and tilted her face up at the November sky the way someone does when they have not been outside in longer than they remember. He let her have the moment. Central Park in November was stripped down and gray. Emma walked slowly, and Blake matched her pace. She stopped at the pond near the boathouse and watched 2 ducks cross the dark water. They stood without speaking. Then Emma said without looking up, "She used to lock the door." Blake was quiet. At night, Emma continued, her voice flat and even, the way a child speaks when they have rehearsed something many times before saying it out loud. "If I knocked, she would not open it. So I learned not to knock." Blake looked at the ducks on the water. He did not say he was sorry, because he had never used those words as a reflex and was not going to start. He did not say it was over now, because a man who had lived his life knew better than to promise things about the future. He said, "You will not have to knock on a locked door again." Emma was quiet. Then she looked up at him with those dark eyes that held far more than 6 years should carry. "Is that true?" she asked. "Yes," Blake said. She looked back at the water. "Okay," she said. Small, careful, not fully open yet, but a door pushed 1 inch wider than it had been. They stood by the pond for a long time, the man who controlled half the underworld of New York, and the 6-year-old girl who had been sleeping in an empty room with a locked door down the hall, watching ducks cross cold water while the city moved around them without knowing or caring what it was witnessing. The file arrived on Blake's desk 4 days later. Brody set it down without comment, which meant he had already read it and decided the contents required no introduction. Blake opened it at midnight, the study door locked, the lamp, the only light in the room. Emma Rose Callahan, 6 years old. Born at Bellevue Hospital on March 14th. Mother, Claire Callahan, 24 years old at the time of birth. Listed her occupation as waitress. Her address as a women's shelter in the Bronx. Father, listed as unknown. Claire Callahan had surrendered Emma to the state foster system 8 months after her birth. The caseworker's note read, "Mother states she is unable to provide safe and stable environment. No further contact recorded." Blake turned the page. 3 placements before Nicole's household. The first, a couple in Queens, returned Emma after 4 months citing adjustment difficulties. The second, a single woman in Brooklyn, relocated and could not take a child with her. The third, a family in the Bronx, returned her after 6 weeks with no reason beyond the standard phrase, "not the right fit." What the caseworker note said, in the flat, bureaucratic language designed to record without judging, was that Emma had spent the first 6 years of her life being handed from one place to the next, and had learned in each one to make herself small and quiet and undemanding. And it had not been enough in any of them. He turned to the last section, a single page. A social worker addendum filed 2 weeks before Emma had been placed with Nicole. A note flagging that during a routine check-in the child had presented with what appeared to be a bruise on her upper arm. The previous placement family had provided an explanation. The file noted the explanation had been accepted. Blake set the page down on the desk. He sat for a long time without moving. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he had not used in over a year. The woman who answered was named Dr. Sarah Voss. She ran a private clinical practice on the Upper West Side and had also spent 12 years as a court-appointed child psychologist before going into private practice. The question Blake had was not the kind he could ask anyone in his organization. He told her what he had found in the file. He told her about the drawing inside the closet door. About Emma eating half a plate of food with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to expect more. About the 3 inches away from the corner. About, okay. Dr. Voss listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a pause. "What is it you are asking me, Blake?" she said. He said, "I need to know what she needs. Not what the system provides. What she actually needs." "Time," Dr. Voss said. "Consistency. Someone who shows up the same way every day, whether or not they feel like it. She does not need grand gestures. She needs a Tuesday that looks the same as the Monday before it. She needs to knock on a door and have it open." Blake looked at the drawing on his desk. He had taken it carefully off the closet door that afternoon and brought it downstairs without quite knowing why. The 2 figures in the pencil garden. One small, one tall with yellow hair. "I can do that," he said. "I know you can," Dr. Voss said. "That is why you called." The next morning, Blake was in the kitchen at 7 when Emma came downstairs. She stopped in the doorway when she saw him, the brief recalibration of someone who had not yet learned to expect people to be where they said they would be. "Scrambled or fried?" he asked. Emma blinked. She said scrambled in a voice still half full of sleep. She climbed onto the stool at the kitchen island and sat watching him cook. He slid the eggs onto a plate, added toast, set it in front of her, then made his own plate and sat across from her. They ate without talking. It was the most ordinary thing Blake Donovan had done in longer than he could remember. And when Emma finished and pushed her plate forward and looked up at him with a question forming in her face, he said before she could ask, "Same time tomorrow." She picked up her glass of orange juice and said, "Okay." The third okay. But this one was different. This one did not have a question underneath it. Nicole's move came on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after she left. Blake was in his study when Brody walked in holding a single sheet of paper with the expression of a man delivering something he wishes he did not have to. "Federal inquiry," Brody said. Someone had filed an anonymous tip with the Financial Crimes Division. Detailed. Specific. Account numbers, routing codes, names of 3 shell companies Blake had used to move money through a hotel group in Atlantic City 4 years ago. Accurate enough to have come from someone who had been inside the operation. Nicole knew those accounts because Blake had been careless exactly once, leaving a binder open on the dining room table during a call she had not been expected to walk in on. "Have Rains build the wall," Blake said. Then he set the paper down. The thing about people who fight with information is that information moves in both directions. Pull everything on Nicole's father, every account, every structure Richard Cole helped him build over 30 years. "I want it by Friday." Brody left. Blake sat with the stillness he inhabited when something large was in motion and patience was the only correct posture. Then his phone rang, a number he did not recognize. He answered. The voice was a woman's, quiet, careful. "Mr. Donovan," she said, "my name is Claire Callahan." Blake went completely still. That name was in a file on his desk. That name belonged to a 24-year-old waitress from the Bronx who had surrendered a baby girl 6 years ago. "I know who you are," the voice said. "I have known for 6 years. Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. I never wanted to give her up. I was 24 and alone, and I had nothing. But before I made that decision, I tried to reach you. Twice. I called a number I was told was your office. The first time a man said you were unavailable. The second time the line was disconnected." Blake's hand tightened on the phone. "I did not know your name when it happened," Claire said. "I found out later. By then, Emma was already in the system, and I was trying to get stable enough to petition for her back. And then I got sick, and the months became years." Her voice broke slightly and steadied. "I found out 2 weeks ago where she had been placed. A woman I know in family services told me what that household was like, what was happening to my daughter in that house." Blake was on his feet without deciding to stand. "Where are you?" he said. He was at Claire Callahan's walk-up apartment in Astoria in 31 minutes. She opened the door and looked at him the way someone looks at a consequence they have been rehearsing a long time. She had Emma's dark eyes, the same watchful stillness, the same quality of a person who has learned to read a room before committing to any expression. "I never got those calls," Blake said. Her jaw moved. She had been carrying the version where he had known and done nothing for 6 years. He could see the weight of that version shifting in her face. "If I had gotten them, things would have been different." Claire sat down by the window and pressed both hands over her face and did not make a sound, which was somehow worse than crying. Blake sat across from her and gave her the time. When she looked up, her voice was level. "What happens now?" she said. He had held one question in his mind the entire drive to Astoria. Not the question about Nicole or the federal inquiry. The question about Emma. About a 6-year-old girl who had drawn 2 figures in a pencil garden and taped the picture inside a closet door where no one was meant to see it. One small, one tall, with yellow hair. He said, "That depends on what you want." "What I want," Claire said slowly, "is for her to be safe. To be somewhere nobody locks her out in the dark. To know the person she is with will not hand her back." Blake nodded. "She drew a picture," he said. 2 people in a garden, one tall with yellow hair. I think one of them is supposed to be me." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "She drew that same picture at every placement. A house with a garden and a tall person with yellow hair. Every single time." Blake understood then what he had not let himself fully form into words. Emma had not been drawing a wish. She had been drawing a memory. Something she had been told about, described to her. Held onto the way children hold onto the one true thing they are given when everything else is taken away. He looked at Claire across the small apartment in the gray November light. 2 people connected by a 6-year-old girl who had been eating half plates of food and saying "okay" in a careful voice and drawing the same picture over and over until the person in it finally walked through a door. "I will not hand her back," Blake said. His voice was the quietest it had ever been in his life. "That is the only promise I know how to keep without conditions." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and said, "Okay." And for the first time in this story, that word belonged to someone other than Emma. But it meant exactly the same thing. If you made it to the end of this story, I want you to stop for just a moment before you scroll away. Because what you just watched was not really about a mafia boss. It was about a little girl who spent 6 years drawing the same picture. A house with a garden, 2 figures, one small, one tall with yellow hair. She drew it at every placement. Every single one. Not because she was hoping for a stranger to appear, but because someone had once described that person to her, and she had held onto that description the way children hold onto the one true thing they are given when everything else keeps changing. And she carried it through locked doors and half plates of food, and 3 inches away from the corner until the day the person in the picture finally walked down a hallway and could not move. That image, a man who has never been afraid of anything in his life, standing frozen in a hallway because of the silence of a 6-year-old girl, is the kind of moment that does not leave you easily, because most of us have been that child in some form. Maybe not in a corner with our arms around our knees, but we have all learned at some point to make ourselves smaller, to stop knocking on doors that do not open, to eat half the plate and not expect more. And we have all, at one time or another, drawn the same picture over and over in our heads. The version of things where someone shows up, where someone stays, where the door opens when we knock. Blake Donovan was not a good man by any standard the world uses to measure goodness. But in that hallway, something in him recognized something in her, and he made a choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a choice anyone outside that house would even see. He just sat down on the floor, at her level, and he waited while she decided if he was safe. That is all any of us are ever really doing, is it not? Waiting to see if the person across from us is going to stay or leave. Waiting to find out if this time, okay, really means okay. So if this story moved something in you, if there was a moment that made you stop, if you thought of someone while you were listening, we want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if you have ever been the person in the corner, or if you have ever been the person who sat down on the floor. Every single comment you leave is how we know these stories are reaching the people who need them. Share this video with someone you love. Someone who needs to be reminded that the people worth keeping are the ones who show up the same way every single day, not just when it is easy. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss what comes next, because the next story is already waiting, and something tells us you are going to want to be here for it.